your life feels really meaningless, you're gonna be so uncomfortable, you're gonna be distracting yourself from the discomfort of feeling like life is meaningless. And you're gonna have to turn around and look at that, and that's gonna be kind of uncomfortable, but it's also super exciting.
What if everything you've been taught about success is actually making you miserable? Arthur C. Brooks has spent decades studying the science of happiness, why high achievers reach the top and still feel empty.
When we asked people, do you feel like your life is meaningless? 15 to 20% of people would say, yeah, I feel like my life is meaningless. The human brain was designed to function about 250,000 years ago, when humans started to live in bands of 30 to 50 individuals, to be in communion with one another. That was how we were supposed to get our satisfaction, to find really the meaning of life.
He's dedicated his life to answering one question: what actually makes a life worth living? Today, he's here to break down why chasing more will never be enough and how to build a life that actually feels fulfilling.
When you're told to do nothing, you immediately start thinking about big questions, questions of meaning. If technology is substituting for in-person relationships, it's going to make you depressed. The same thing is true, by the way, for AI. It's perfect for how to and what questions. It's horrible for why questions. Happiness is based on meaning, and meaning is based on love. If you don't know what to do, go love someone.
So Arthur, you spent 6 years studying meaning, and you say that this is the hardest book that you've ever written. Why is that?
Because the meaning of life is the hardest question. And you have, I mean, it's like, you look for questions that you can answer, that you can really get your mind around. Like, how fast is this company gonna grow? You know, how fast do I think it's gonna grow on the basis of how it's performed? Those are closed-ended questions. The ultimate open-ended question is, what is the meaning of life? It's insane. I mean, and yet I couldn't get away from it, because I've been studying this, what we call a psychogenic epidemic. That means an epidemic, something that creates misery but doesn't have biological origin. And the psychogenic epidemic of depression and anxiety and loneliness, it's unambiguously related to the meaning of life. You find that the biggest predictor of being depressed and anxious, especially if you're a young adult, is being unable to articulate the meaning of your life, or saying, I feel like my life is meaningless. So for years, I'm like, I can't deal with that. I can't deal with that. It's got to be something more specific. It has to be something that's a real research question. But, you know, I do the analysis, I do the interviews, and they keep talking about meaning and meaning and meaning. And I say, well, what if I wrote a book on the meaning of life? And people say, yes, that's what I want. And so I just had to suck it up and actually take it on. And so that's what I did.
Do you feel like, because just intuitively, I feel like people are more stressed and anxious and seemingly have lost meaning in their life, almost in like a post-COVID world where everybody just seems like life is not as good as it used to be. I don't know if that's just intuitive, or is that actually reflected in data? Like, are people more stressed out than ever before?
Yes, but it actually started in about 2008, 2009. What happened is it accelerated during COVID. So 2008, 2009, we started to see a real kind of a hockey stick. So for when we asked people, for example, I mean, for the longest time about depression and anxiety, it kind of bumped along, you know, all through the 1980s and 1990s and the 2000s. And then around 2008, 2009 just took off. And then it accelerated even more during COVID. You also find that, do you feel like your life is meaningless? This is a question that a bunch of different places have asked over the years. It's around the same. It's like, you know, about 15 to 20% of people, of young adults, would say, yeah, I feel like my life is meaningless forever and ever and ever, until 2008, 2009. And that took off too. My life feels meaningless. That's really what happened. And of course, it got worse during COVID.
So what is happening? Because you mentioned before, this is not a biological response. This is something that is cultural, societal. And when you interview people about, do you have meaning? Do you feel meaning? Like, is life for you meaningless? Do you notice that there's differences in different cultures, societies, countries around the world, or is it just a universal?
So to begin with, my assumption that it was not biological. When I started to do the research, it turns out that there are biological implications to this. The origin of it, however, is not a contagious virus. On the contrary, it's a sociological or societal phenomenon. We can get into that. Where does it actually manifest? Largely among young adults, and especially among young adults that are well-educated. Now, this is a weird thing. You know, you see a psychogenic epidemic that's largely afflicting people under 30 or 35, and especially those people who went to college. That's a weird thing to say, oh, wow, what's happening here? You find that, for example, the people who didn't go to college are less likely to be depressed and anxious than people who did go to college. So
Like, why is that?
can be
Because this
possible.
person is smart, pursuing education, obviously on some sort of career path.
There's something going on with our culture of high achievement, of strivers, of highly technologized citizens that's doing something to their brains that's making it harder for them to find the meaning of life. There's something about going to college and pursuing white-collar jobs, to live in the hustle culture, to be spending your life on the screen that's changing your brain. That's really what's going on here. And that's what I had to dig into, and that's what I found.
The person who is highly ambitious, somebody is pursuing secondary education, this is the person who is struggling the most. And is it somebody who has a job, is making money, hasn't found a job yet? Like, is there any other circumstances that dictate if this person is struggling?
Yeah, I mean, not having a job is going to make you struggle no matter who you are.
For sure.
You know, being unemployed, being alone, being lonely, those are predictors of depression, anxiety, loneliness, self-harm, no matter who you are under any circumstances, at any age. And those exacerbate what we're talking about. But all things equal, we're really talking about this part of the population that did everything right, that, you know, followed the rules. They're largely from families that gave them the best technology, and they went to college and they studied what people are supposed to study in college, which is things that actually lead you to getting jobs, and they get jobs out of college. They followed the rules, and something is actually making their life feel really empty and bereft of purpose, and to feel like life isn't significant, doesn't have any feeling to it. And it's funny because when you start doing the interviews of these young people, you see the data, they start dropping the same words over and over again. I don't feel like I know what I'm meant to do. I just work and work and work, or my life feels empty and meaningless. And here's the weird one that you keep finding, that people say, they describe their lives, and it's kind of the same story again and again and again. You know, I work, a lot of it's remote. You know, I date on apps. I'm on social media, which is where I have a lot of my friends. A lot of guys in particular will say, for fun, I do a lot of gaming. And then a lot of them will say, it's weird. It's like my life is a simulation. You know, I'm online all the time. I'm using technology all the time. I'm mediating my relationships through machines. I'm working super hard, but I'm not really with people in a real way. And so it feels like a simulation. And that turns out to be the key. That's where the penny drops. Because when your life is actually a simulation, you can simulate a lot, but you can't simulate the meaning of your life.
There's a story about Mark, who's a 32-year-old data analyst.
It's the beginning of the book, yeah.
Yeah, so he describes listening to podcasts as social pornography, basically simulating connection without real human contact. But there's other things in life that are sort of simulated. So fake rewards, empty accomplishments, therapeutic talk, curated experiences, all these things that don't feel real. I mean, even like said simply, a lot of our experiences, even like if we're dating and we're swiping on apps, it just seems like
you're trying to solve the problem of romance as opposed to living the experience of romance. I mean, the way it's supposed to work is you meet somebody and then you figure out whether it's a match. That's the way the human brain is designed to work. It's not designed to work where you curate the experience through this technology-mediated experience where you say, I'm gonna mathematically try to find the right person for me according to some particular algorithm. That sounds good on paper, but what I talk about in the book is what actually is going wrong. That's actually at odds with. That's militating against how the human brain is designed to work. That's what we're living unnaturally, is the way that this works. So the human brain was designed to habituate itself to function about 250,000 years ago, at the beginning of the Pleistocene. That's when humans started to live in bands of 30 to 50 individuals, and it was entirely in person. We were a kin-based society. We were made to be in communion with one another, to mate, to have children, to be in kin-based groups, to eat together, to make direct eye contact. That was how we were supposed to get our satisfaction, to find, well, really the meaning of life. And our brains are the same as they were then. We're living in an entirely different kind of milieu at this particular point. And the people who are most out of the natural environment, who are living most at odds with that Pleistocene kind of brain environment, are the people who are most modern. And the most modern people are well-educated adults under 35 who don't remember the before times. So I'm in my early 60s. I remember the before times. You're 35. You're right on the edge.
Yeah, I remember we didn't have a cell phone in high school.
Yeah.
I think I got my first BlackBerry when I was in like grade 10 or 11. But
well, the first time that you asked somebody out on a date, it was in real life and in person. How did you meet your partner?
Well, that was on a dating app.
That was on a dating.
But I had never been, so I hadn't really ever been part of this whole dating app culture. I was in a long-term relationship with somebody that I'd met at work. Right. And then I was single, but I wasn't really trying to date. And then I downloaded an app and then I saw her on it. And then I actually didn't even bother to swipe. I actually found her on Instagram and DM'd her. And then we ended up going out. So it all worked out. But I never really participated in like dating app, hookup culture, you know, swiping through 500 people and going on 500 dates. Like I've never really participated in it.
That will lead you to depression and anxiety, generally speaking. Yeah, and that's kind of you're maximizing time in app as opposed to time in person. You don't do the work with individuals. You're trying to find the ideal individual according to the computer. And that's a big problem because that's not how the brain is actually designed. Now, the way that this actually works, you know, so I'm talking around the whole thing. What the computer does, what technology does, and by the way, our economy largely functions as a giant computer as well. It does, we're in a milieu of doing complicated things all the time, solving what and how to questions. Complicated things are important to be able to do. Now, what complicated means is that these are hard problems, but you can solve them. That is, all those problems are mediated in the left hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere is for complicated stuff, the tasks, efficiency, technology. The right side of the brain, the right hemisphere of the brain, is dedicated to complex problems. And complex problems are easy to understand and impossible to solve. So romantic love is a complex problem. My marriage is unbelievably complex. I've been married 34 years, and I have no idea if my wife's going to be pissed at me today. I don't know. I just don't know. And it's not because I have a crummy marriage. It's just because that's a complex thing. It's an adaptive, it's an unpredictable thing. And if you're trying to make it predictable, solvable, you're taking this complex thing like love and you're forcing it into the left side of your brain and making it complicated. And that's what modern life is doing. That's why life feels like a simulation, because we're taking all the complex relationships and mystery and meaning, all the dark consciousness of the things that we really care about, all the why questions, and we're turning them to what and how to questions. That's what the culture, the economy, and technology are actually doing. And meaning is on the right.
And I would assume that this is an impossible thing to solve for as a simple, like with job, with love and partner, with all of these different very complex things that we take into our life. It's impossible to ever solve simply because there is no answer. Right. There's no answer to, at the end of the day, should you be with this person versus that person? Right. Because, or the other 498 people, because there's arguments that could be made for every single one of those people. And at the end of the day, one person could work and one person could not, and it just depends on how much effort you put into it.
You understand exactly. You know, and there's all kinds of, the things we care about in life are complex and unsolvable. What they are, you can only live them and understand them at an intuitive level. So, I mean, the reason that we like watching football games is because they're complex. They're super easy to understand. The Miami Dolphins get more points than the New York Jets. That's actually almost always the case. And we understand that Miami Dolphins win the game, but you can't simulate it. You can't actually solve it with a computer, with any amount of computing horsepower, because it's a complex problem. That's why sports is wonderful. Sports is kind of like life. That's why we love sports, actually, because it's part of life, a part of the parts of life that we like the most. You know, you love your cat. You don't love your toaster. Your toaster is complicated. Your cat is complex. It's very easy to understand what your cat wants, but you don't know what it's going to do because it's alive. All the living, mysterious things, all the why questions of your life, those are the things you care about the most. And the world says, no, I'm just going to give you more and more doodads and more gadgets and more widgets and more apps and more ways to distract you and addict you and push you away so you're never feeling bored. And the one thing you're not going to get is the one thing that you most want, and you're not going to be able to put your finger on it. It's like, what is it I'm missing? I'm missing something. Oh, well, I guess I'll get that app and maybe that will solve the problem. Maybe I'll get this protocol and it will solve the problem. It won't. It won't, because you're on the wrong side of your brain.
Optionality is what's creating a lot of this, I'm assuming. Just endless options.
Yeah, well, that's what that is endless distraction. Optionality is distraction. And why we want distraction is because we want to solve the problem of human boredom. Boredom is a funny thing. We're built to be bored. Homo sapiens are built to be bored. When we're bored, the default mode network in our brain illuminates, and that's a set of structures in our brain, largely involving the parts of our brain that mediate meaning. And so when you're told, if you're put in an fMRI machine and you're told to do nothing, think about nothing, you can't. You immediately start thinking about big questions, questions of meaning, questions about the future in your life. But that's uncomfortable. Part of the reason is because Mother Nature doesn't care if you don't like it. I mean, you had no choice until relatively recently, but we solved the problem of boredom, which is the device in your pocket. And anybody who doesn't believe this, there's a couple of things to think about. When you're sitting at a light and it's going a long time, you always look at your phone because that becomes this uncomfortable. You don't want to go into the default mode network, but you need to. And then when you have to, weird things happen. Like everybody gets their best, deepest ideas in the shower. It's because the phone isn't in there. And your default mode network turns on while you have the hot water coming onto your body and you're like, oh, this is what I want to do today. And this is what we need more of. You know, we solved the boredom problem and got a much bigger problem, which is a sense of meaninglessness.
So now when we refuse to have, so our boredom is filled with almost replacing the meaning that we've already found with potential new meaning. And this creates this horrific loop that we're always...
Well, there's no meaning at all. All it is simple distraction.
So it could be meaning if we weren't looking for, something else. It's like the person we're with, that could be our person. The job that we have could be our job.
Totally. We could find our calling if we were actually allowing ourselves to live the way and our brains to function the way our brains are supposed to function. And so this winds up being the solution. If, people say, where do I go to find the meaning of my life? Italy, church, the beach? No, the right side of your brain. How do I do it? This book talks about the 6 ways to get into the right side of your brain. And it's weirdly simple. Your grandfather, I don't know what he did for a living, but let's just say, or your great grandfather, probably a farmer or something in Canada someplace, right? Yeah. And I promise you, he didn't come home to your great grandmother and say, honey, I had a panic attack behind the mule today. Because it wasn't a thing. His, hypothalamic pituitary axis didn't get flooded for no apparent reason in the year 1890 because his brain was working the way it was supposed to work. His life was pretty boring, good. And so the things that we need to do that are kind of extraordinary today, they look an awful lot like the way that people used to live in the past, but we got to do it on purpose now.
How do we architect a life that actually gives us meaning? Yeah. What are the steps? And obviously the people that you're interviewing, they're not living these steps. This is not the reality. So
no, almost nobody is. Almost nobody is. And you have to do it on purpose. The first thing you need to do is to get clean. And that means you gotta break away from the things that are addicting you to constant distraction. And when I say addicting, I mean that with respect to dopamine. I mean, all craving and addiction, desire to something that we hate, but that captivates us, that beguiles us, it almost always involves dopamine. Dopamine is a neuromodulator of learning, wanting, liking. And the reason it's in the human brain is so that you would learn how to do stuff that's rewarding to you and then do it automatically so you can learn new things and become more successful as a species. I went to that watering hole. I found some gazelles around it. Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to go back tomorrow to see if I can get another neurological reward for finding more gazelles. I mean, the problem is that it's maladapted to things like drugs and alcohol, meth and slot machines and pornography and all the things that actually addict people that are really horrible for their brains. And what have they done? We're geniuses. We've found a way to actually use those things to addict people and make money. And technology is a perfect case in point. People are super addicted to their devices. I mean, absolutely addicted to the nonsense. I've never met somebody who says, I love scrolling for hours at a time.
But we all do it.
But people do it. And the reason is because their dopamine systems have been hijacked into doing that. And so the first thing is to actually get clean, is to actually figure out a way that you can take back your independence. And most people have never done that. And so before I get into the whole thing, I have a chapter on getting clean, which actually starts by getting pissed. This is one of the things that all addicts have in common. Nobody goes into a 12-step program for alcohol before they're like really mad about actually what has happened to their life. They have to have a spirit of a rebel. So I talk about that. But then there's some techniques about how you're not going to get away. You're not going to throw your phone in the ocean. I'm not going to either. I mean, I just use it all the time. but you actually can use it in a healthy way, where you don't look at it when you first wake up in the morning. You don't use it for an hour before you go to bed at night. You don't look at it while you're eating, during meals, especially meals with the people that you love. And just with some simple interventions that I have in this book, you can break the cycle of wanting, learning, and liking. You can break the fundamental dopamine modulated addiction that we've got from it.
And it seems like you mentioned before, the solution to the meaning of life, one of the most complex questions, is actually not that difficult at all. But the average American, so you stated that they look at their phone over 205 times.
Yeah, 205 times a day, the average American. Yeah.
Like it's a lot of times. What's happening every time they look at their phone? Like from a neurological or neurochemical response. So this is just triggering dopamine all the time, and it is truly an addiction.
Yeah. So what's going on? Let's just say that you haven't looked at your phone in a while, and you're having a flight of fancy. You're thinking about bigger things in life. You're starting to stimulate a little bit of right brain activity. Well, the dopamine, you'll get a little spike in dopamine when something reminds you of your phone, and you'll grab for it, and you'll grab the phone, and boom, that thought is over. It's done. You're back on the left side of your brain. And if you're doing that 205 times a day, you're kicking yourself over into the how and what, onto the Google side of your brain. And I got nothing against the Google side. It's just that you need the right side too. You need the mystery and meaning side of your brain. And so what's happening is you're just like getting kicked out of the part of your brain that you need again and again and again and again. And so that's what you need to do on purpose, is to have protocols in your life where you say, no, for the first hour of my day, I'm not looking at my device. For the last hour of the day, I'm not looking at my device. While I'm having dinner with my family, I'm not looking at my device. And those simple interventions go a really long way to starting the process.
When you start shutting your phone off or not looking at it every second of the day, and you're just not addicted to it anymore, what's happening in your brain now?
Yeah, you're actually having the deeper thoughts, and you're starting to get the satisfaction that you actually craved. You're starting to have the sense of the meaning of your life that you haven't felt in a really long time. It can be extremely life-changing. It's hard.
Is it uncomfortable?
Yeah, for sure. The first 2 weeks in particular. The first 2 weeks are like the monkeys on your back, and the reason you're an addict because
detoxing from your
your dopamine is going to go look, and you're no. And that's the reason that you don't throw your phone away for the first 2 weeks. But besides, you can't do that. I mean, most people, you can't get on an airplane.
Well, no, you need a healthy relationship with it.
Yeah, it's more like, it's less like alcohol, which, complete abstinence is the right. If you're drinking too much, you should stop drinking completely. It's more like carbohydrates, where if you're really addicted to junk food, you can't stop eating.
And we even eat less.
But you need to eat in a healthier way. And that's, by the way, that's a harder addiction problem to solve, because moderate use is actually harder than abstinence.
Quick question. What's your go-to when you got 10 minutes before a meeting or a workout? For me, it just used to be whatever I could grab, which usually meant skipping meals entirely or just grabbing something that left me crashing an hour later because it was just full of garbage. That's why I'm partnering with Huel. This black edition, ready to drink, is a complete meal. So it has 35 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, 35 essential vitamins and minerals. It is no sugar added, gluten-free, under $5. I always keep a few of these in my fridge, and honestly, it solved the whole back-to-back meetings, go, nonstop, no time to eat problem super well. And this one's new for me. It's Huel's Daily Greens. I had the blueberry this morning. Honestly, first impression, it was way better than I expected. It's developed by registered nutritionists and dietitians. There are 42 vitamins, minerals, and superfoods, only 25 calories, 4 grams of fiber, and just 1 gram of sugar. I throw one back first thing before my morning calls every single morning. Look, if you're running a business, time is the most valuable asset. Huel makes healthy eating simple, and they also just launched into Target stores nationwide, so you can get it everywhere. Try both products today with 15% off your purchase for new customers with my exclusive code SCOTT at Huel.com/Scott. Try both products today with 15% off your purchase for new customers with my exclusive code SCOTT, SCOTT, at Huel.com/Scott. Use my code, fill out the post-checkout survey to help support the show. That is Huel.com/Scott. They really make healthy living taste amazing. Even if you're on the go, healthy eating, healthy lifestyle, doesn't have to taste bad. It doesn't have to suck. NetSuite is the #1 AI cloud ERP. It's trusted by over 43,000 businesses. It's a unified suite that pulls your financials, inventory, commerce, HR, and CRM into a single source of truth. That connected data is what makes the AI smarter. It doesn't just guess, it knows. It can automate routine tasks, it can deliver actionable insights, and it can help you cut costs and make fast decisions with confidence. And now with the NetSuite AI connector, you can use the AI of your choice to connect
to your actual business data and ask every question you've ever had. This isn't just another bolted on tool. It's AI built into the system that actually runs your business. So whether your company earns millions or hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you stay ahead. If I needed something like this for my business, I'd use NetSuite, and you should too. So if your revenues are at least in the 7 figures, get our free business guide, Demystifying AI, at netsuite.com/Scott Clary. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/Scott Clary, netsuite.com/Scott Clary. What about other technology? So phone is obviously
That's the biggie, because that's the small screen. That's the thing, right?
but if somebody is, for example, trying to find meaning in all areas of their life, they've stopped with their phone. Are there other habits, other things that they do?
That's what I get into in the rest of the book. So once you actually break away from the one thing that's crowding it out. I mean, the big rule is this: if technology is substituting for in-person relationships, it's going to make you depressed. If technology is complementing your in-person relationships, it can be a nice thing for your life. So I'm not a Luddite. I'm not anti-tech at all. It just has to be in its proper place such that it can make our lives better and not make our lives worse. The same thing is true, by the way, for AI. People ask me this all the time. Will AI make us happier or unhappier? I'm a happiness specialist. So this is the typical thing. First hand up after every talk, right? And the answer is yes. Because if you're actually, the AI is an adjunct to your left brain. It's perfect for how to and what questions. It's horrible for why questions. It can't answer mysterious why complex questions in your life. So think about it this way. All of the meaning questions, if you can, or all the questions in your life, if you can ask AI and it will give you an answer that's useful to you, it's not a why question. It's not a meaning question at all. If you can put it into a Google search bar, it's a how and what question. It's not a real deep why of your life question. Like, hey, ChatGPT, why am I alive? And it's just not meaningful. And the reason is because that's a right brain question, and your brain knows the difference. So the way to have AI make you happier is to use it to free up your time by doing more how to and what stuff, more left brain stuff. But then with the time, you got to use that time for more love in your life, for more real relationships, for more spiritual reflection, for all of the right brain stuff that, we're about to talk about. That's really what it comes down to. On the other hand, if you're trying to use AI as your lover or therapist or friend, all the right brain stuff, your brain's going to know the difference and you're not going to like it. You're going to weirdly get lonelier and lonelier the more you have an AI friend.
It's horrifying.
Yeah, and that's exactly where a lot of people are going. A lot of people try to use ChatGPT as their therapist. And that's just not going to work. It won't work. It'll pass the Turing test. It'll feel like something a therapist would actually say. I mean, I've heard a avatar of me giving advice. And at the very beginning, it's like, wow, it is literally my voice. And it is trained on 1 million words of me. And then I hear myself talking, and the first 2 answers, I'm like, that's pretty good. And then by the third answer, I'm like, that's not right. That isn't right. Why not? I don't know. Because my brain knows. My brain knows. It's not meaningful, what I'm saying.
It's horrifying because you are trained and you can understand it. And you study this for a living. The average person is just going to feel like it's off and it's empty and
That's
it's
right.
wrong.
And so they're going to try to do more.
Yes.
This is what people always do. They're like, I'm not getting that feeling I used to get from drinking a 6-pack. So I'm going to have 2 6-packs. I'm not getting that feeling I get from, looking at pornography. So I'm going to look at more extreme pornography. That's how addiction works, is that you try to get more and more and more into something to solve a problem. And the problem is that you're doing that thing. That's how heroin addicts work. That's tolerance and escalation.
You've heard of this like AI psychosis.
Yeah, that's right.
Where people are quite literally losing their mind while they're talking to AI too much.
And there are a lot of entrepreneurs in the Valley who are saying that actually what we need is the perfect technology to solve this problem. Well, no, dude. I mean, that's like that old Saturday Night Live sketch, more cowbell. Will Ferrell's banging on the cowbell and ruining a song, and the producer of the song is saying what we need is more cowbell. That's what trying to get more and more technology really is. You can't get to the right part of your brain by going farther and farther left.
So you say meaning has 3 components: coherence, purpose, and significance. Yeah. So this is after we've done the work, shut off the phone. Now we're moving from left side to right side for the questions that need the right side. So what do you do? Because I think that for coherence, why do things happen the way they do in my life? Purpose, why am I moving in this direction? Significance, why does my life matter? I'm going to make the assumption that if somebody has been living in the left side of their brain for an extended period of time, they are going to try and answer these questions with like a definitive outcome.
Right.
And I feel like that's not the right way to do it.
That's right. And so, really, really deep why questions in your life are things that you consider and you gain an understanding of that's kind of beyond your language. The language centers are in the left side of your brain. For 97% of people, about the language centers are, the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area of the cortex are on the left side of the brain. But the things that you're trying to describe in depth, like, you're in love, right? And if I press you to, okay, give me 5 reasons you're in love.
I'm going to name like personality, physical traits, experiences with the person, but.
And I can find somebody who fills all of those things that you're not in love with. Yeah. And so those, in other words, axiomatically, that's not the reason. Yeah. And so we know you are because you are, and yet anything you say could apply to some other woman walking down the street or your 3rd grade teacher maybe. And so it's not right. And so that's the problem with this whole idea that everything has to have a closed-ended answer. That's not the way things work. Now, all major philosophies and religions, practically, they're all based on questions, not answers. And here's a weird thing. We often think that the essence of human genius and humanity itself is the ability to answer these unbelievable questions. People often say, human genius, what is it? What is it? What makes humans human? We can answer any question. That's wrong. That's actually wrong. Robots can answer questions way better than we can. What they can't do is ask interesting questions. There was this famous case of Koko the gorilla. That was before your time. Koko the gorilla was a Ugandan lowland gorilla that was raised in captivity and taught 1,000 words in sign language. And everybody thought that blurred the boundaries between humans and non-human animals, but it didn't, because Koko never asked a single question. Koko answered questions. Are you hungry? Yes, no. Do you want a banana? Yes, no. That's what Koko the gorilla did, but Koko never asked a single question. There's never been any example of any species ever that ever asked a single question besides human beings. The essence of humanness is questions, especially questions that don't have answers, which is why every religious tradition asks, who am I? Why am I alive? What is God? These are these really super open-ended questions that you can't answer. You can only understand, that you can only live. Why am I in love with my wife after 34, I gotta count, 34 years? I mean, I know, but I can't tell you. And that's the point. That's this complex right brain experience. And that's where we have to live. That's the beginning, is actually asking these questions and sitting in it. I recommend that people start groups of people of considering the questions that don't have answers.
What happens when you sit with these questions? Actually, before I want to know what happens when you sit with these questions, but I just want to frame it for the audience first. Can you speak a little bit more about these 3 components, just so people understand it? So coherence, purpose, significance. Can you just a brief description of what these actually mean?
So this is kind of the meaning of meaning. How do you define meaning, right? And which is a very philosophical, but it's actually, this is put together by a psychologist named Mike Steger at who's in Colorado. Mike Steger has been studying this meaning question for a really long time, and he finds that psychologically there's sort of 3 components to meaning. They are what he calls coherence, which is, why do things happen the way that they do? You need a belief, an understanding of why things happen. Because if you're like, for no reason, that's going to be really hard on you for meaning. Like, for no reason, I'm not going to look into it. Things just happen randomly. It's just a big random walk. And maybe your explanation is scientific. My father was a biostatistician. He would say randomness is actually a property of the universe. And this was a coherence theory, right? He was also a Christian. He said God has his hand in it. That's a coherence theory. Some people have, the reason that people gravitate toward conspiracy theories is they're looking for coherence. Because we hate coherence, because life feels meaningless. The reason that people grab onto conspiracy theories is because they want meaning. It's actually a meaning play, is what it comes down to, right? The way that you solve conspiracy theories is education and faith, because it gives them a better sense of coherence. Is how this works. So that's the first component, right? But that's not the only one. The next one is purpose. Purpose and meaning are not the same thing. Purpose is why you're doing what you're doing. It's goals and direction. It's the ability to make progress. In sailing, it's called the rum line, which is this line that you're going toward in your life. You got to have it. which is why one of the best ways you can give young people a sense of meaning in their life is to actually have them map out their life goals. That immediately gives them a sense of purpose. It puts them on a trajectory towards something. And again, the answer to the question is, the why question is, why am I doing what I'm doing? If you have goals and direction, you have at least a sense and understanding of the answer to that question, right? I can't tell you exactly because I'm going to start a company that's going to go to IPO, yada, 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 yada. I mean, you can try to left brain it like that, but more than anything else, you need that, why am I doing what I'm doing that's ineffable? It goes a little bit beyond your ability to be specific, but you got to have an answer, an understanding of it. And the last is, why does my life matter? That's significance. Why does my life matter and to whom? Why does it matter? And if the answer is, it doesn't, well, right? Which is why people find so much more meaning when they fall in love, when they have a relationship with God, when they have close friends, because that's answering the significance question. Why does my life matter? Because it's my friend, because my friend loves me.
What happens when people start to explore these questions and they're not? So let me go back. You mentioned that people have this lack of meaning in their life, and that's creating all this stress and anxiety and depression and all these negative things. Is there no concern that after 35 years on this planet, when you start to explore these questions, you may not be happy with the answers that you come to, and that may lead to, or maybe in your research you find that it leads to temporary depression, anxiety, stress, loss, just hopelessness, but then long term it can actually help you sort of course correct?
It's a smart question. Nobody's ever asked me that before, and it's absolutely true. So if you tell me, like, my wife and I were on the rocks, man, and I'm going to give you advice, because one of the things I talk about an awful lot is about how to get your relationship in order. I'm going to tell you to deal with it, and it's going to hurt, right? And it's like, so what have you been doing? So I know your relationship isn't so great. What have you been doing? It's like, I'm trying to kind of distract myself. And we've been kind of not talking about it. And I go home and we watch television and we don't deal with our problems. And I'm like, if you want to get better, you got to look at it. You have to cope with it. If you tell me you drink too much, I'm going to say, we're going to have to cope with it. You're going to have to deal with it. The same thing we talked about earlier about brainless technology use. You got to deal with it. And the first couple of weeks are going to be kind of hard. And the same thing is true. If your life feels really meaningless, you're not going to like it. You're going to be so uncomfortable. You're going to be distracting yourself from the discomfort of feeling like life is meaningless. And you're going to have to turn around and look at that. And that's going to be kind of uncomfortable, but it's also super exciting. It's one of these things where it's like, I'm going to start off on this adventure and it's going to hurt. So it's funny, two of my kids are military. 2 of my 3 kids are Marines. And both of them have gone through hardcore training. One of them was an enlisted Marine and went through basic training, and then he became a sniper and that's the hardest core training ever. It hurt. It was dangerous. It was brutal, and he loved it. And he loved it because it was the start of something really amazing. It was the start of something that was really worthwhile. My daughter did it later, and she's in the middle of it right now. Her hardest core training as an officer. And, I see her every weekend because she lives kind of near us, and officers get to go home. She's commissioned, and I'll be like, so what did you do this week? And it's just horrible, the stuff that she's telling me. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, I slept outside and it was actually snowing. And then I had to walk 12 miles with a 70-pound pack. She was 100 pounds, right? She's 4'11". And she tells me this stuff and I'm like, I'm sorry, honey. And she's like, in such a good mood because she's doing this hard thing that's incredibly rewarding. And that's what this promises. It's going to hurt? Yeah. And you're probably going to love it.
People introduce themselves with what they do. What's wrong with that?
Because that's a left brain answer to the who you are. Because the essence of who you are. Yeah, no, it's basically, so people ask me, so what do you do? And that's an invitation for me to say I'm a professor at Harvard University. And that's factually true and pretty morally insignificant. That tells you nothing about the why of who I am. And so if you're trying to get to know me, all you know is my job. And this is the currency. This is but my wife, who's from Spain, she complained that that's what Americans always do. Americans are very superficial in this way. They want to know, they don't want to know your why. And my wife is super deep. And so she would, invite people over and just like dig in on these super deep questions. And you could see people getting incredibly uncomfortable at dinner in my house. Because and when you go to Spain, you actually see this. I remember that, we go to Spain all the time because, you know, we've been going back and forth for 35 years. And we go to these people's house. We'd never met them not that long ago, a few months ago. You know, we sit down and you know, we're sitting around and laughing. And within 5 minutes, the hostess, she turns to all of us, about 8 of us. She says, have any of you ever almost left your spouse? And we're like, gulp. And it's like, go deep or go home.
Yeah, but
That's
that
kind of what it
brings
comes
that.
down to.
Then you get to know the actual.
You do. And some people can't handle it because they're not used to it.
Because they've never done any of this
Right.
work.
Yeah, but those are why questions of your life. Those are really, really deep questions of your life. But it's like, what do you do? Or, you know, how do you live from day to day? How do you spend your time? That's just not good enough. I mean, it's kind of an icebreaker in its way, but man, get to the why. Get to the why of somebody you want to get to meet. You know, why do you feel the way that you do? Why do you do the things that you do? Why? You know, what motivates you at a deep kind of cosmic level? That's what I want to know.
So I feel like if somebody asks you a really deep question, a really deep why question, and you have this adverse reaction to it, it's probably because you haven't asked yourself those questions ever before. Yeah. That's why it feels so abnormal.
Yeah, for sure. Because you're just not in the meaning space. But as soon as you get into that, you know, and by the way, it might be because you're defending yourself because you don't trust that person. You don't trust that person. But you don't go to, if you're paying $100 an hour for a therapist and you go and sit in your therapist's office, they're not going to ask you what questions the whole time. They're going to be like, so what do you do? What'd you do today? You know, what'd you have for lunch? You know, it's like, what'd you watch on television? No, they're not going to wait. They're like, what do you think of the weather? They don't care. They're going to go directly to the deeper questions of meaning. And that's what you're paying them to do. So why don't you have that in your ordinary relationships as well?
When somebody wants to start asking why questions, where do they start?
So every religion gives you the starting point, almost every philosophy, but not everybody has those tools, which is why I actually have a whole, and this is an assignment I have for my class. It's why I have a whole chapter on a good place to start. It's a curriculum on this, which are the 3 big why questions. You know, why do you believe things happen the way they do? And then it gives you a rubric for figuring out your own beliefs. Why are you doing what you're doing? You know, why are your priorities what your priorities are? And I give you exercises for figuring out the answers to get an understanding of that. And why does your life matter? Which is a real hard one because that's really digging into who loves you and whom do you love. And I have a whole way for people to figure that one out as well. And by the way, if their answers or their understanding is inadequate, then it talks about what do you need to do? What do you need to do to fix it?
And when somebody starts to actually understand their why, their meaning in life, on the other side of these exercises, what do you see with people?
You see that people, their life starts to open up. They start to question things they haven't ever questioned before. They start to act in a different way. They start to get new friends. They start to pay attention to things that they haven't paid attention to before, like many details that they had missed, and they stop paying attention to stupid nonsense. They become intolerant of trivialities in ways that they haven't before. They get bored really easily with things that are supposed to, with the bread and circuses of ordinary life. Their life changes. And by the way, they become a pain to their friends. If you do this, you might wind up in different relationships.
But relationships that serve who you are.
You'll like what happens to your life, but your friends might not like what happens to your life.
Well, no, because you probably, how many people did you interview?
Lots. I mean, I've been interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people over the course of the past 7 years.
And
since
what's
I've been
the
doing
balance?
this full
What's
time.
the percentage of people that never ask these questions versus do? Like you say that we're in this crisis where this lack of meaning is just increasing at an exponential rate. Yeah. So obviously the majority of people on this planet are not asking themselves these questions.
Yeah, and there's a selection bias for the people who come to me. The people take my classes at Harvard for a reason. You know, the people who've got this stuff figured out, you know, they're not like, they're not gonna go take the happiness science class at the business school. They're the people, and again, it's a very oversubscribed class. I've got a 400 on a waiting list for this. And the reason is because it's such an endemic problem for sure. But then the people who reach out to me, which is every single day, people are reaching out to me. These are people who they're not like, you know, I mean, you don't go to the cardiologist and say, you know, I think that old Ticker's just doing great. I mean, you go because there's a problem. And so people are behind the line of scrimmage. And then, of course, what I really want is to get to everybody who can get down the field, even if they're in good shape.
Indeed is a success story partner. Now, if you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Let me give you an example. If I needed to hire a new editor for this show, I'd go to Indeed and be super specific. Not just, can you edit audio? I'd say I need someone who's edited a conversational podcast for at least 3 years, gets our style, and knows our software. Someone who's done this before. And here's the thing with Indeed sponsored jobs. I'd get people who fit that description. I'm not digging through resumes from people who've edited one YouTube video. I'm getting actual podcast editors who know what they're doing. People who've worked on shows like ours and can prove it. That's what makes the difference. You get people who actually are what you're looking for. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. And people are finding quality hires right now. In the minute that I've been speaking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all the boxes, less stress, less time, and more results now with Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help you get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/Clary. Just go to Indeed.com/Clary right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Clary. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. HubSpot is a success story partner. Now, if you're looking for a new podcast, one of my favorite shows right now is Demand Decoded. If you're in the B2B marketing space, you need to be listening to this. It's hosted by the team at Blend. They are a demand gen agency. They know what they're doing. They're also part of the HubSpot podcast network. What I love about it is they skip all the theory and they just tell you what's actually working today. So demand gen, marketing, content, LinkedIn ads, attribution. They talk about real strategies that they are using that you can use today that are working. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're building a business, if you're really selling anything to anyone, go search Demand Decoded wherever you get your podcast.
There's people that resist the meaning crisis. They have what you call social antibodies. What's going on when somebody resists finding meaning? And there's a few different things I want to talk about. There's sort of 6 practices that people with meaningful lives share. I want to talk about aporia. I want to talk about these meaning resistors. But I guess we could probably start with meaning resistors, because I feel like that would be the majority of people. Why are people resisting meaning?
Because life is easier when you don't deal with these questions. That life is just easier because we're lazy. Again, what are we doing? We're when people are resisting digging into meaning, we're really resisting boredom. We're really resisting dealing with big questions. We're probably resisting questioning our relationships with people who are keeping us in the trivial space. We're probably resisting dealing with addictions. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. It's just, don't rock the boat, man. Yeah, is my life meaningful? No. Is my life actually in a kind of a bad way, deeply tedious? Yeah. Do I want to change it? I'm not so sure. Because I don't know where that's going to lead me. There are a lot of people who are literally afraid to stop drinking. And I've talked to a lot of people. I've worked in the addiction space for years and years and years. And people who are deeply addicted, they're afraid to stop drinking or to take drugs because they don't know what's going to happen in their lives. They're going to lose their friends. They're not going to have fun anymore. They're going to have to deal with really big and uncomfortable problems, they think. And you know what? They're right. Now, there's nobody who gets off the junk who says, life would be so much better if I were still a junkie. No, nobody ever said that, right? And so when you do the work, it's unbelievably rewarding, but getting started is really hard.
I mentioned aporia. So my understanding of aporia is asking these unanswerable questions.
And that's an ancient thing of the ancient philosophy. Usually, it's a Greek word, and the Greek philosophers would be is sitting with unanswerable questions, because they knew that was going to put you into the space, and that's what all of the great, in the early Christian, like the Benedictines. The Benedictine monks, if you wanted to become a Benedictine monk, they would ask you these questions that had no answers and see how you dealt with them, because they wanted to know whether or not you were capable of going deep. They didn't know the neuroscience, but what they were basically saying is let's see how healthy the right side of your brain is, because if you want a real relationship with God, you better have a good right-hand side, because the mystery and meaning is over there. And the way I'm going to test it is how you cope with these questions.
It's so interesting how we lose so much knowledge. Like all of these things that we investigate and research and know that are good for us. You're mentioning like these Benedictine monks knew that it was also good for us, but we always forget. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, well, it's funny. There's whole schools of And by the way, this is not just Western. Zen Buddhism is based on koans, which are riddles. And that's aporia. That's this whole set of questions that don't have answers. So the master monk will ask the novice, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Go away and think about that. Because what it's doing is like, it's exploding open the right-hand side of your brain is to cope with something like that. Or the whole, here's a classic one of these. A novice monk is walking down a trail by himself. And a master monk is approaching him, coming the other direction. And the novice monk says, where are you going? The master monk says, I don't know. And the novice monk says, why don't you know? And the master monk says, because not knowing is the most intimate knowledge. Consider.
It's so good. How do you aporia?
Aporia, yeah.
Aporia. Okay, that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah,
okay.
aporia, yeah.
So this is one of
the... It's not a word that we use today, right?
It's definitely not a word that I normally use.
We need aporia in our lives.
Now, the other 5 practices, you mentioned romance, transcendence, calling, beauty, and suffering as like the other 5.
Those are the other 5 things that open up the right-hand side of your brain.
Okay, so we touched on romance, and obviously you could probably do like 5 hours on every single one of these topics, but just so people understand them at sort of like a rudimentary level. Transcendence, calling, beauty, and suffering. Right. Can you explain perhaps the wrong way we interpret these things now, like the bad habit that we do across these 4 areas, and then the way that we have to sort of re-envision or look at these 4 practices differently so that they can also open up the right side and lead to more meaning?
What does modern life do where you get this wrong? And how does the old school way of living actually help you get it right? So let's start with transcendence. And transcendence is like this big word that can mean almost anything. But what it really means is to transcend yourself. Modern life is nothing but mirrors. It's a hall of mirrors. And, it's almost as if your house, all the walls were mirrors. And so no matter where you look, you're looking at yourself. That's really what the technologized super hustle economy, the homo economicus model of normal behavior, where I'm just a good economic engine, I'm an efficient animal. It's all about me, my accomplishments, what I'm doing. It's like the whole idea of taking a picture of your lunch and putting it on social media is the most narcissistic thing. I want everybody to see that I'm eating an overstuffed burrito.
Like I did that last night.
But everybody, the whole point is the ultimate is the hall of mirrors of this. And the problem with that is what William James, the father of psychology, would call that's too much time in the me self. And to actually become a happier person, you need to be in the I self, which is looking out and especially looking up to transcend yourself. So paradoxically, for you to understand the why of your life, you need to get smaller and make the universe larger.
I was going to say, because I don't want people to interpret these exercises as completely self-serving.
No, on the contrary. And this is the funny thing, I've had a long relationship with the Dalai Lama, and I talk about the Dalai Lama in this book. I've been working with him for 12 years. I'm not a Tibetan Buddhist, I'm a Catholic, and he wants me to be a better Catholic, and it's a beautiful relationship and friendship that we have. And I asked him one time why he's so critical of Americans who practice Tibetan Buddhist meditation. He's not against it, but he's often very critical. And he says, because they don't understand the reason for meditation. I said, well, tell me more. He says, people meditate, many Westerners meditate, so they feel better. He said, the only reason you should meditate is so that others feel better. In other words, you should be meditating about love for the whole world. And in so doing, you will have more love. But the motive has to be others. That's transcendence. That's the essence of transcendence. This is incredibly self-serving, but only secondarily to the other-serving behavior, to the worship of the divine and the service toward other people. That's what transcendence is all about. The way to get out of the hall of mirrors is to actually, the easiest practices are serious study of philosophy or a practice of religion or spirituality and serving other people in a real way. Serving others just for them, loving them as them is how that, and I talk a lot about how people do it and the effect that it actually has on their lives. And what it does is just kicks you into the right side of your brain.
I love that. And it's also something that is so contradictory to how most people operate today.
Yeah.
Everything is, what do I get out of this? How do I get something that serves me out of this?
And that's normal,
even when they
by the
listen
way.
to this podcast,
Yeah.
they're listening and reading this book and they're like, how do I use these tools to make my life better?
Yeah, it's the meaning of your life. And so they're reading it as the meaning of my life, right? And so the whole point that I'm trying to get in this chapter is The way that you're going to find the meaning of your life is helping other people find the meaning of their lives.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah. And that's really what my work is all about. I want happiness teachers. My job is to not create just happier people. I want people to become happiness teachers.
You find that when, I mean, like, I feel that we have that same sort of goal, just differently. Like, I have interviews, and yes, it's a business for me for sure. But at the end of the day, if I can give as much value as I possibly can, then the business works out for me.
That's right. And the more you focus on your love for other people, this is the reason you're successful, is you have love for others. When you bring your service in a spirit of love, what do these people need? What do they need? Then it succeeds. It succeeds because you've actually been able to get out of the hall of mirrors. And by the way, you find meaning.
Yes.
Actually. So that's really how it works. And then of course it requires practices, because that's the reason I wrote the book, is because people are like, okay, that's a great theory, professor. Thank you very much. But how do I do it? And so every chapter has really, really practical exercises for getting started on this. And again, that's a very left brain protocol way to do it, but you got to get started in some particular way.
Yeah. What about calling? So calling is
what you're meant to do, usually through work, but it's really through productive activity. And so for a lot of people who stay home taking care of their kids, that's calling. It's figuring out what you feel like you're meant to do. And it has everything to do with sort of feeling like you're earning your success, creating value, and serving other people. Once again, it's, what does the world actually need for me to do that I can do really well, where I earn my success and I'm needed. That's really what it comes down to. And most people don't really ask those questions. They're like, what am I really good at and people will pay me for? That's what the hustle culture, and that's why college students in modern life, they tend to be quite unhappy. They tend to be suffering more from this psychogenic epidemic than other people, because they're taught, they're not taught. There's this great Japanese concept called ikigai. Have you ever heard about this?
I was just going to ask you if this is helpful or hurtful to follow a concept like that.
It's a good thing to do, because it takes the limited concept of what I'm good at and what the world will pay me for, to also what I love and what the world needs, is what it comes. And there's that ikigai concept of those four. The convergence in the Venn diagram of those four worlds. The world will pay me to do this, and I'm good at this, but also the world needs this, and also I love it. That's magic when you're actually in the middle of that. And what we need is actually those last two, what the world needs, and and what I feel inherently and sort of spiritually rewarded by doing. And the way to figure this out, a lot of young people are listening to you because they follow your work. Okay, yeah, great. What? How? The answer is, number one, don't be propagandized. Don't be forced into something. And number two, experiment a lot. And, I talk to lots and lots of my students, and deep down, what is going to give them a sense of meaning is taking care of their families. And they can, but they feel like, I'm just wasting my education if I do something like that. No.
I hear this a lot. I hear this a lot.
And for a lot of people, and look, let's go back to the Pleistocene. We got Pleistocene brains, man. That's really important, that taking care of your children, and taking care of your family, taking care of your kin, that is a super divine calling. That's a deeply meaningful calling. And to say that's what I'm going to spend the next 6 or 7 years primarily spending my time doing when my kids are little, that's a great thing to do. That's a wonderful thing to do. That's a meaningful thing to do. And a lot of the reason that people don't do it is because they've kind of drunk the Kool-Aid of our society that says that, man, if you're not out there hustling and, grinding and bringing in a big paycheck, then you've wasted your fancy education at Princeton. And so shame on you.
It's not just society is propagandizing these ideas. It could be your parents. It could be your peers. It could be a guidance counselor in school. And well-meaning too. That's what's difficult. I'm sure if you listen to a hustle culture or some, BS entrepreneur telling you to work 150 hours a week on Instagram, you can kind of understand that may not be the healthiest advice. But people that are close to you, that mean well, that just want the best for you, they also may have not done this work. Right. So they could also assume that their worldview is the worldview that's correct, and they impart that on you, and then you adopt that worldview even from a young age, and then you grow up and you never sort of have any of these meaningful conversations with yourself. Yeah. And then now you wake up and you're 50 years old and you've just been living someone else's life, dream, job, whatever.
And that's the curse of the striver. And it's actually, I talk about this a little bit in the book because I kind of specialize in strivers. I'm the striver whisperer. And, a lot of people are watching your show is because they're strivers and they wanted, and I admire the fact that they want to do the most with their lives. That's great. It's incredibly meritorious. But there's a real dark side to that, which is that people who are strivers and who are kind of addicted to success, usually the way that their childhood looks, to speak to your point, is that they only get attention and affection when they do things. And, love is funny because love is a free gift freely given. Love is a grace. You can't earn actual love, but they wire their brains. And in the period of highest synaptic plasticity, when their brains are under development, they learn that if I get first chair in the orchestra, if I make the pitcher on the baseball team, if I bring home straight A's on the report card, if I get into an Ivy League college, then they'll love me. And what that, in wiring your brain, what that does is it sets you on a pattern of success addiction, later workaholism, that will drive your relationships away from you. You're not a human doing, you're a human being. And so I have to really help people with that addiction a lot of the time. And calling is one of the ways to do that. Helping people into really what they're meant to do is an important step, and actually getting clean on that is, and that's a forward way of thinking for a lot of strivers.
And strivers have a very hard time listening to advice.
They do. They especially have a hard time listening to advice that they need. They'll listen to advice that sounds right in modern culture. Like, here's some advice on how you
sort of validates their own belief system.
Yeah, for sure. But it's also this my side bias, which people are prone to all the time, where it's like they'll listen to advice on how they can make more money. They'll listen to advice on how they can be more successful. They'll listen to advice on how to make personal sacrifices if it's good for worldly rewards, money, power, admiration of other people. They don't want to listen to advice very much on hard things about how they can actually know God and fall in love and, that.
The things they should work on.
Yeah, although it's funny because once they trust you, once they trust that you love them and have their best interests at heart, then that's really what they do want to hear about at the end of the day. That's what the reason that I call my podcast Office Hours is because office hours is where the magic gets done. When you're a teacher, that's when people come in and say, Professor, we've been talking about, forming stable families this week in class. Can I tell you about my parents and my relationship with my parents? And that's where the real work gets done.
Let's talk about beauty. So beauty is nature, art, or moral beauty. Explain, because that's an abstract concept without a definition. So what does beauty mean? And how do we do beauty incorrectly?
So the way that we do beauty incorrectly is by mediating it with devices. If you're seeing nature primarily through your phone,
as opposed to traveling.
Yeah, it's like, I see all these beautiful mountains on Instagram, on other people's feeds. Sorry, that's a completely inadequate substitute. So the average child today, the average child under 12 spends between 4 and 7 minutes a day in nature, in actual nature. I mean, they might go out and, walk to the bus or something like that, but, actually in nature, 4 to 7 minutes a day on average.
Contrast to my grandpa or great-grandpa that was all day.
He was like, he was behind the mule, right? They spend 4 to 7 hours a day behind the screen. And so anything that is a simulation of beauty actually isn't beauty. And again, I'm not saying that there's nothing that your computer can do that's not beautiful. There are all kinds of really interesting forms of art, of music, of, the things that people are doing. I write my books on a computer. To be sure, if I were a poet, I would probably be writing on a computer doing that. And that's somehow technologically mediated. But the whole point is that when you're simulating beauty that already existed through technology, you're getting at best a shadow of what it actually is. So the 3 things that neurologically will give you right-hand hemisphere experiences and open up the understanding of meaning, give you experiences of meaning, are natural beauty, as you kids say these days, touching grass, right? That's the reason, by the way, if you're behind the screen too much, that expression touching grass means it's like, I got to get back in touch with reality. But what that really means is I'm too much on the left-hand side of my brain, and I really don't like it, and I'm very, very uncomfortable without explaining the neurobiology. And so I'm going to go outside and fresh air and see the sun and all that, maybe literally touch the grass, take off my shoes or whatever. What that's going to do is something I can't quite explain. Well, now we know what it is, right? And then exposing yourself rigorously to nature. I mean, seriously, dose, but as if you were, and I'm prescribing it right now in your show. That means your next vacation should be a nature vacation. Your weekend activities should be nature activities fundamentally. More hiking, more skiing, more sitting outside, right? And by the way, if you say, well, nature vacation, thank you, Professor Moneybags. No, I mean, if you have to take a pup tent and go to your backyard,
And just spend more time.
you need to spend more time outside. Artistic beauty, same thing. Same thing. Music, art, poetry, literature, real book with real paper, real pages. This vacation, go someplace outside in your pup tent and read the Brothers Karamazov. Go read Dostoevsky. Go read the Russian existentialist. Man, your life's it's gonna blow your mind. And last but not least is moral beauty. By the way, physical beauty, as in sexual attraction through physical beauty, doesn't do it. Different parts of the brain.
Different parts of the
Different
brain.
parts of the brain. It actually doesn't
You have
affect
to
it the
seek
same
out
way.
different beauty.
So staring at pictures of beautiful girls for you is not going to get it done. So your girlfriend is going to be pleased that I mentioned this. But moral beauty, where you're actually seeing incredible acts of self-service, they have a huge. They create what's the there's a great social psychologist named Rhett Diesner. He's in Idaho, and he does work on moral elevation. And moral elevation is this feeling of warmth in your chest. And what that is this vestigial sensation that actually comes from these right hemispheric experiences.
The last practice would be suffering.
Yeah, it's a hard one.
So what does suffering mean?
Suffering is...
We intuitively move away from suffering.
Yeah, we do, because we're evolved to avoid suffering. Suffering is the intense experience of negative emotion. There's only 4 negative emotions, basic emotions: fear, anger, disgust, and sadness. And we're averse to all of them because these are signals of threats. Different kinds of threats. Sadness is a signal that you're losing something or someone that you love. Anger and fear are both mediated in the limbic system by the amygdala, that there's something that can and might and will hurt you. And disgust is a signal that there's a pathogen that could poison you and hurt you, which is why we're disgusted by things that smell bad or look rotten or look dead or whatever they happen to be. And those are natural defenses against threats that tell us move away, avoid, right? But you can't avoid them. You can't avoid pain in life. You can't avoid suffering. You're going to have negative emotions. You have those negative emotions because the stimuli are inevitable. And if you didn't have those negative emotions, you'd be dead. You'd have it's like having no skin. You'd have an infection within seconds and you'd be dead within a day. You need these particular defenses, and they have to be negative and uncomfortable for a reason. Furthermore, your negative experiences are your teacher, and there's a lot of research on this. When you have negative experiences, that's how you learn and grow. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, what we do in modern life, what the therapeutic colossus has done in our society, alongside the therapized, social media culture, has said that suffering is something to be avoided. Is to be alleviated and avoided, because suffering means that something's wrong. If you go to your campus counseling center and say, I don't know, man, it's like I'm really sad and anxious. I'm sad about not having enough friends, and because I just came to college and I'm really lonely and I'm anxious about my classes. They're going to say, well, we got to solve this problem. It's like, if you go to college and you're living away from your family for the first time, and it's a hard college, and you're not sad and anxious, you need therapy, because you're exposing yourself to something hard for a reason. And you're like, basically, I'm doing something wrong, because when I go to the gym and lift weights, it kind of hurts. So I guess I'm doing something. No, that's the point. That's the point. And we need to get much more accommodating to this in our lives, and to say, bring it on. Bring it on. I'm going to learn and grow, because that's your teacher. That's your teacher about the why of life. When you're suffering, now again, it can be exaggerated. Don't get me wrong. I'm not one of these super anti-therapy guys. That's not what I'm talking about at all. But normal suffering is normal life.
And we have basically, now that you go through these, it makes a lot of sense why we feel the way that we feel, because we have sterilized our life of almost all of these things.
Yes.
So that there's no unanswerable questions and deep thinking. There's no romance. There's no transcendence. There's no calling. There's no beauty. There's no suffering at all.
And well, the truth is, ironically, that the more we try to alleviate suffering, the more we suffer.
That is ironic.
It is ironic, isn't it? And so that the suffering that we shouldn't be enduring is the anxiety and depression and loneliness that actually come from spending all day online. We should be suffering because somebody just broke up with us. We should be suffering because we're really, really searching for God and it's hard. We should be suffering because I went for that job and I didn't get it. That's what we should be suffering about.
So the meaning of your life, finding purpose in an age of emptiness. That's going to be out available when this show drops, everywhere you can get books. Where else do you want to send people if they want to consume your content, podcast, everywhere else?
So I have a podcast called Office Hours with Arthur Brooks. And everything that I write and everything I'm doing, all the surveys that I do and my reading lists and all the tests that people can take about how much meaning they have in their lives, that's available on my website at arthurbrooks.com. A lot of the content is free. There are also workshops that people can actually take and kind of get started on this, and they can figure out how to, it'll direct them to my weekly column, and there's always more to learn.
I'm excited. I'm excited for this. I'm excited for the impact it will have on people, because as you walk through sort of these ideas, I can understand why so many people are just lost. Right. And I appreciate you putting in the work, because I have these conversations almost like at an anecdotal, theoretical level with a lot of people, a lot of smart people trying to figure out why do the people I work with just seem like they have no enjoyment of life anymore? Why do I feel so empty and alone inside? But nobody can put a finger on it. Right. And I think that it's nice to take something that seems so out of touch and sort of make it a little bit more figure-outable.
That's why I avoided writing this book for a long time, was because it was going to be so hard to do. But once I got into it, I said, oh, and me too, me too, and all of us, really. And once we understand this, that, living in a new old-fashioned way, and so it's not just some super, super technical neuroscience idea. It really is living in a particular way. And we can all do it, but we have to do it on purpose. Then life really starts to change.
If people read this book and they can only take away one lesson, the most important idea, what do you want to leave them with?
Happiness is based on meaning, and meaning is based on love. If you don't know what to do, go love someone. And it doesn't really matter how you feel. To love is to will the good of another person, to go act in kindness, to act in goodness, and to actually do something as a pure act of love towards somebody else. You'll find the meaning in what you're doing in that moment, and that'll change your life in a small way, and who knows, maybe a big way too. Happiness is love.